People familiar with the Harrington estate frequently spoke of its sweeping, manicured grounds and the ornate iron gates that guarded the main entrance. They described the massive marble columns framing the foyer, the glittering chandeliers that illuminated vaulted ceilings, and the velvet-draped windows overlooking rolling hills. All these opulent features belonged to Alexander Harrington, a billionaire known for his exacting standards and business acumen. According to those who worked for him, he rarely tolerated surprises or diversions from his well-ordered routine. Within that grand estate lived Harrington's only child, Charlotte, a young woman whose life had undergone a profound shift in recent years. Staff members recounted how Charlotte's once vibrant presence abruptly dimmed, following a tragic car accident that left her paralyzed from the waist down. It recalled that she had been an energetic college student, rumored to be an enthusiastic artist and a lover of dance. But the accident robbed her of that creative physical expression she cherished. By all accounts, she slipped into a reclusive existence throughout her recovery. Nurses observed that she seldom left her suite, except for hospital visits or mandated therapy sessions, as though unwilling to socialize in a house she now associated with constant reminders of her limitations. Several months before the events that would shock everyone, a new driver arrived at the estate. Byron Jefferson, a middle-aged black man with a calm demeanor. According to the staff, Harrington had employed many drivers over the years, but circumstances led to repeated turnovers. Byron, by contrast, settled into his role methodically, keeping a polite distance from the rest of the household while performing his duties. The housekeeper remembered that Byron rarely spoke about his background, acknowledging only that he had some experience with community service and youth mentoring. Over time, small hints surfaced that he also knew something about dance, though it was unclear whether dance had been part of his profession or merely a personal hobby. The estate's sprawling layout typically meant Byron had to assume multiple tasks beyond simple chauffeuring, especially when Harrington traveled for extended periods. It was during one such interval that Byron first encountered Charlotte in a more personal context. Witnesses among the staff mentioned that Charlotte's nurse sometimes struggled with transferring her from one room to another. Byron, who happened to be nearby, offered assistance, carefully supporting Charlotte's wheelchair so the nurse could adjust a seat cushion. The nurse recounted that Charlotte appeared both startled and appreciative of his gentle approach. In subsequent days, Byron would cross paths with Charlotte more frequently. The nurse assigned to her recalled that he showed genuine concern about Charlotte's well-being, inquiring about her routines and whether any muscle-strengthening therapies were helping. Charlotte, for her part, remained guarded in the beginning. She was said to respond in monosyllables or nods, but staff noticed that she did not object to Byron's presence. A few employees conjectured that Charlotte sensed a certain gentle energy in him, which contrasted the formal and often detached attitude that characterized much of the Harrington household. Gradually, the nurse and one of the housekeepers overheard Byron and Charlotte discussing minor details about music and art. Because these exchanges occurred outside earshot of others, they were relayed to the staff only in fragments. People gleaned that Byron asked Charlotte about her former interests, prompting her to disclose, with some reluctance, that she had once taken ballet classes in her teen years and later dabbled in modern dance in college. The staff interpreted Charlotte's talk of dance as both nostalgic and painful, reminding her of the lost ability to move freely. At some point, the nurse recalled catching a glimpse of Byron quietly wheeling Charlotte through a seldom-used corridor lined with mirrors. According to her recollection, Byron believed that reflecting on movement, any movement, might help Charlotte reconnect with her body, even if only from the waist up. She also recounted that Charlotte watched him demonstrate simple gestures with his arms, describing them as deliberately slow, fluid arcs that emphasized grace rather than athletic prowess. The rumor among staff was that Byron revealed his past involvement in a community dance program for youths, although he minimized the credit he gave himself, implying it was just a small part of his life back then. A turning point occurred one afternoon when the housekeeper discovered Byron and Charlotte in a corner of the estate. This grand ballroom and opulent space that had stood mostly unused since Charlotte's accident. Charlotte sat in her wheelchair near a full-length window, and Byron guided her shoulders, arms, and head in a slow, synchronized motion, set to a gentle jazz track from a portable speaker. Observers discreetly kept their distance, unwilling to disrupt the unexpected scene. They remembered that Charlotte's expression looked hesitant yet quietly determined, as though the dance awakened memories and hope at the same time. Byron, for his part, concentrated on timing and gentle corrections, ensuring Charlotte never felt rushed or pushed beyond her comfort level. The staff who witnessed this began whispering among themselves, noting how unorthodox it seemed for a household driver to take on a role akin to a dance instructor, yet they recognized Charlotte's slight progress in posture, mood, and willingness to socialize as remarkable. She no longer remained hidden in her suite all day. She sometimes ventured to the ballroom or a smaller parlor to practice these modified dance routines with Byron. Nurses started to see small improvements in her overall engagement with daily life, even if her paralysis remained unchanged medically. Observers believed Alexander Harrington had no inkling this was happening. Known for a regimented schedule, he boarded private jets for routine business abroad, presided over executive meetings, and indulged in philanthropic galas that seldom took him back to the estate before late evenings. He had grown somewhat distant from Charlotte's day-to-day progress following the accident, focusing more on specialized therapy programs or hospital consultations than on any personal interaction that might foster emotional support. Staff members admitted that they partly feared Harrington's reaction if he found out his driver was providing an unofficial form of dance therapy to his daughter. Some speculated that he might dismiss Byron outright, either from a sense of intrusion or paternal overprotection. Olivia managed the imaging procedure with the same guarded composure she had displayed before. She remained somewhat tense, especially while the machine's hum surrounded her, but she did not appear on the verge of ending the session prematurely. Once staff finished recording the necessary images, they stepped out to allow her privacy to reorient herself. According to the nurse, Olivia's expression shifted from apprehension to tentative relief as soon as the machinery was switched off. The nurse suggested that Olivia seemed relieved to have completed that portion of testing without any unpleasant surprises. When Dr. Thompson returned to examine the initial scan results, he relayed a cautious optimism that nothing glaringly unusual had surfaced, though he did mention a minor region that might necessitate closer inspection. He proposed a biopsy, describing it as a brief procedure that could provide definitive clarity. The nurse in attendance later reported that Olivia responded by asking about the potential discomfort and whether local anesthesia be administered. Dr. Thompson explained that local numbing agents would minimize pain and that the procedure would be swift. Staff inferred that Olivia's acceptance of the idea, although hesitant, reflected the growing trust she placed in Dr. Thompson's expertise. After the imaging session, Olivia took a moment to compose herself in a small waiting area. She was overhead speaking with the receptionist, requesting more details about the scheduling and exactly how long a biopsy appointment typically lasted. She also sought assurance that the same nurse would be available, reiterating that continuity in personnel soothed her anxieties. The receptionist indicated that this request was doable, and Olivia nodded in acknowledgement, as though each small accommodation helped her feel she retained a measure of control. Across the facility, a few staff members, who had followed Olivia's journey through internal reports and office rumors, admired her resolve. They recognized that many patients would have switched clinics long before, especially if they had strong preferences about a doctor's gender. Olivia's decision to return a second and now a third time suggested to them that Dr. Thompson's sensitivity was making a measurable difference. A nurse who had witnessed multiple interactions commented privately that this situation testified to the significance of transparent communication in healthcare. She reiterated that Olivia had consistently emphasized her need for detailed explanations, and Dr. Thompson had managed to honor that requirement at every step. By the time Olivia departed the imaging wing, employees reported that she looked somewhat drained, but not overtly distressed. She carried a binder filled with informational handouts about the biopsy procedure and potential follow-up regimes, reflecting Dr. Thompson's commitment to thorough preparation. Although her face remained composed, staff sensed that she grappled with an undercurrent of anxiety. They described her as someone who was no longer wholly fearful of a male doctor's presence, but still wary of allowing herself to fully relax in that dynamic. Later that evening, a friend who spoke to Olivia by phone recounted that she used words like methodical and precise when summarizing the day. She highlighted how Dr. Thompson had once again taken the time to explain everything clearly and confirm her comfort before proceeding. She indicated that the staff consistent willingness to involve her in each decision had drastically alleviated the sense of powerlessness she once felt. At the same time, she insisted to her friend that her journey toward genuine ease with a male gynecologist was far from over. She characterized her emotional state as being in a gradual transition. Some days she felt more at peace, while on others the old wariness surged back. From an outside perspective, the general consensus among clinic staff and Olivia's personal circle was that this latest visit cemented a pivotal choice. Olivia was choosing to stay the course with Dr. Thompson's practice, even though it went against the grain of her long-held restrictions regarding male doctors. Most believed her continued willingness to engage in further tests signaled both her recognition of his professionalism and her priority to stay on top of her health. Although no one claimed her fear had vanished, everyone who spoke with her noted a shift in her language. She was no longer describing Dr. Thompson as an unwanted substitute. Instead, she occasionally hinted that he had become a surprisingly reliable ally in her medical journey. By concluding her testing day with plans for a biopsy, Olivia passed another milestone in reconciling her preference for female care with the reality of Dr. Thompson's role in her life. The question that remained was how she would feel once additional procedures were underway, and whether the trust she had begun to place in him could withstand the emotional demands of a more invasive procedure. Those who observed her believed the choices she made at this juncture would either solidify her emerging openness or send her retreating back behind the protective walls she had erected over the years. For the moment, though, Olivia continued forward, determined to keep her health a priority, acknowledging that her path would not proceed exactly as she had once envisioned. Observers believed Alexander Harrington had no inkling this was happening. Known for a regimented schedule, he boarded private jets for routine business abroad, presided over executive meetings, and indulged in philanthropic galas that seldom took him back to the estate before late evenings. He had grown somewhat distant from Charlotte's day-to-day progress following the accident, focusing more on specialized therapy programs or hospital consultations than on any personal interaction that might foster emotional support. Staff members admitted that they partly feared Harrington's reaction if he found out his driver was providing an unofficial form of dance therapy to his daughter. Some speculated that he might dismiss Byron outright, either from a sense of intrusion or paternal overprotection. Nonetheless, these secret sessions persisted. Charlotte, without putting her gratitude into explicit words, indicated by her readiness to meet Byron at scheduled times that she found solace in this adapted dancing. The estate's nurse recognized that Charlotte's upper body coordination had improved and that her emotional state seemed steadier. The nurse also overheard Charlotte mentioning that she felt a piece of her old self returning, as though she discovered an avenue to express herself despite her injury. The staff discreetly facilitated this by playing lookouts or adjusting mealtimes, so no one would interrupt. Mutual caution defined these interactions. Byron was scrupulously aware that overstepping could risk his position, while Charlotte remained sensitive to her father's controlling temperament. They collaborated in secrecy, practicing gentle arm lifts, subtle turns of the torso, and minimal movements of the hips, all within the realm of what Charlotte's body could handle. Some staff members wondered if Charlotte was physically pushing the limits of her therapy, but the nurse verified that the mild, seated routines were largely aligned with her rehabilitation goals. Over time, Byron and Charlotte's sessions found a more permanent home in the unused grand ballroom, an echoing space that offered plenty of room for the wheelchair and a few staff watchers who remained quietly in the background. Although no explicit rules were set to keep Harrington from discovering them, a sense of unspoken agreement prevailed. No one would go out of their way to reveal these dance sessions before it became absolutely necessary. Harrington's unpredictability loomed in everyone's mind, given his propensity for sudden mood shifts when confronted with developments outside his control. Everything changed on a clear afternoon when Harrington's schedule unexpectedly shifted, and he arrived at the estate hours earlier than planned. The staff who greeted him observed his usual cool demeanor, though they noticed a hint of fatigue after an aborted business trip. He inquired curtly about Charlotte's whereabouts, seemingly curious to check on her progress. Several employees glanced at each other nervously, aware that Charlotte was in the ballroom with Byron, likely immersed in one of their adapted dance routines. Tension began to build among the staff. They suspected that Harrington might uncover the clandestine activity at any moment. with consequences no one could predict. Those on duty recollected that Harrington proceeded down the main corridor toward his study, but abruptly paused upon hearing faint, unfamiliar music emanating from the opposite end of the estate. Head cocked slightly, he pivoted and strode toward the grand ballroom. Anyone observing him from a distance later mentioned that the slow music and the subdued murmur of dancing footsteps created an unusual contrast to the typical stillness of midday. They braced themselves as Harrington reached the ballroom's open doors, his eyes widening at the sight before him, Byron guiding Charlotte's arms in a gentle, sweeping motion, while Charlotte focused intensely on matching each move. The vast space, once empty and silent, was now filled with a quiet determination and the soft melody from Byron's portable speaker. In that instant, staff claimed a hush fell over the foyer. Charlotte caught sight of her father out of the corner of her eye and froze in mid-motion. Byron, likewise, halted and turned to face the entrance, uncertain how Harrington would interpret this scene. The staff members, glimpsing the encounter from partial vantage points, expected anger, possibly in order for Byron to leave. Yet Harrington remained silent, an inscrutable expression etched across his face. They stood motionless, aware that they were witnessing the start of an encounter that would test the boundaries of fatherly compassion, paternal authority, and the longing for recovery that Charlotte had silently nurtured all along. After that tense discovery in the Harrington Mansion's grand ballroom, staff members described a long moment during which father, daughter, and driver remained perfectly motionless. Charlotte kept her arms half-raised, seemingly caught in mid-expression, while Byron stood at her side, unsure how to proceed. At the threshold, Alexander Harrington looked on with a mixture of consternation and shock, trying to make sense of the scene before him. Observers later commented that he appeared unaccustomed to encountering something so unscripted in his own home, especially pertaining to his daughter's rehabilitation. A few of the household employees stationed nearby explained that Harrington addressed his initial questions to Byron, demanding a clear account of what had transpired. Though they did not recall his precise words, given the reliance on reported speech, they understood that he wanted to know how this dance arrangement came to be and why he had never been consulted. Byron, maintaining a composed demeanor, reportedly told Mr. Harrington how the session started as a small effort to help Charlotte reconnect with the physical and emotional aspects of movement. He emphasized that they always proceeded gently, mindful of Charlotte's paralysis and her medical limitations. Eyewitnesses observed that Harrington then shifted his focus to Charlotte, silent for a moment as though weighing conflicting emotions. According to staff recollections, Charlotte let her arms drop and explained, in a subdued but deliberate manner, that these sessions had rekindled a part of her life she believed lost since the accident. Housekeepers later insisted that Charlotte's expression revealed a rare blend of vulnerability and resolve. She conveyed that, in exploring dance from a seated position, she felt echoes of her old self, the one who had adored dance classes back in her teenage years. Those who listened from the hallway, or behind ajar doors, sensed Harrington's internal struggle. He was acknowledged by employees as a perfectionist who exerted total oversight when it came to his daughter's well-being. Staff guessed that he might regard Byron's involvement as unorthodox and potentially reckless, yet some recalled that his usual brusque tone receded slightly after hearing Charlotte's explanation. While there were no direct quotes, the staff inferred that Harrington demanded further assurance that nothing about these sessions threatened Charlotte's health. Byron, in response, allegedly pointed out that every move was adapted to her limited mobility, carefully guided and verified by the nurse's informal input. Because Harrington valued organized protocols, employees believed he worried that Byron lacked formal credentials in physical therapy or rehabilitation. Nonetheless, Charlotte reiterated to her father that the activity was helping her emotionally, even if it did not constitute an official treatment plan. Several staff mentioned that Harrington paused, appearing torn between his desire to dismiss anything improvised and his sense of responsibility to do whatever might improve Charlotte's spirits. Observers recalled that he eventually signaled his intention to evaluate the situation further, hinting that he neither fully approved nor outright condemned the sessions at that moment. The tension around the estate remained palpable for days afterward. Housekeepers described a stilted atmosphere in the hallways, remarking that Harrington avoided outward confrontation at first, but kept a close eye on Byron's routine. Some employees noted that Harrington made offhand remarks about cross-verifying Charlotte's physical condition with a trusted physician. They anticipated that a formal checkup would be arranged to ensure that the dancing did not aggravate any existing injuries or create new complications. The household nurse, who was still assisting Charlotte, took care to remind Byron of the safest ways to support upper body movement without straining her neck, spine, or shoulders. During this interim, Charlotte's disposition reportedly grew anxious. She interpreted her father's discomfort as a threat to the temporary sense of liberation she had found in those adapted dance practices. Friends of hers, who occasionally spoke to her by phone, mentioned that she dreaded receiving a firm prohibition from Harrington. She admitted to them that she cherished those moments of artistry and the growing rapport with Byron, even if she remained guarded about exposing her emotional vulnerability. Meanwhile, Byron continued his daily chauffeur duties, ferrying Mr. Harrington to and from assorted meetings. According to the mansion's administrative staff, Harrington engaged Byron in more personal conversation than before, as though he wanted to probe the depth of Byron's understanding about movement, injury, and therapy. Byron apparently shared a modest account of his past, indicating that his experience teaching dance at a community center had focused mostly on healthy, ambulatory participants, but that he had also encountered students with various physical challenges. The staff believed that while Harrington might not have been wholly convinced by Byron's informal qualifications, he did gain a clearer picture of Byron's genuine intent to help Charlotte rather than exploit her vulnerability. A caretaker working in the gardens recalled overhearing a conversation in which Harrington asked Byron if he knew the potential risks of letting Charlotte become too emotionally invested in an activity that might not provide a lasting cure. Byron calmly suggested that offering Charlotte a consistent outlet for self-expression, even if it never brought back full mobility, might bolster her mental resilience. The caretaker inferred that Harrington observed Byron contemplatively, as if gauging whether those words aligned with his own sense of paternal duty. In the caretaker's opinion, that interchange left Harrington pondering the boundary between protecting Charlotte from false hope and allowing her a measure of joy in her current condition. At this stage, the staff believed Harrington remained undecided as to whether he would fully support or terminate the sessions. He refrained from imposing immediate restrictions, yet employees suspected he might soon order a formal assessment or impose specific guidelines, precise timings, careful medical monitoring, and close supervision by approved personnel. The intimation of stricter oversight loomed. Some staff quietly wondered if such rules would stifle the spontaneous creativity that had brightened Charlotte's mood. Others felt that if Harrington learned enough to trust Byron's intentions, he might reluctantly permit the lessons to continue. By the end of the second week following Harrington's discovery, the estate had reached a fragile equilibrium. The sessions had not been stopped, but they proceeded warily, with staff aware that Harrington was observing from a distance. During one brief exchange, witnessed by a housekeeper, Charlotte expressed a subdued kind of gratitude toward Byron, mentioning that his unwavering patience was the only reason she had not relinquished those fleeting moments of movement and expression. The housekeeper interpreted Charlotte's hesitation to speak openly around her father as an indication that fear still lingered about his ultimate decision. It was during this precarious pause that employees realized a pivotal moment was approaching. If Harrington chose to embrace the unconventional assistance Byron offered, Charlotte's emotional growth might continue unimpeded. If he rejected it, the fragile progress she had made could vanish, plunging her back into a resigned acceptance of her limitations. Those witnessing these events sensed that Harrington was weighing multiple factors: his instinct for control, his love for Charlotte, and the hidden potential in Byron's gentle guidance. They believed an upcoming conversation or incident might finally clarify where he stood, setting the course for Charlotte's recovery and for the dynamic between the billionaire father, his paralyzed daughter, and the driver whose quiet determination had given her a reason to keep dreaming. At the same time, staff recounted subtle shifts in Harrington's attitude throughout the estate. He began asking Byron for updates on Charlotte's progress, not as interrogations, but as a sort of periodic check-in. He sometimes inquired whether Charlotte had tried any new routines, or if she complained of aches. Byron, in turn, responded thoroughly but modestly, always suggesting that Charlotte's perseverance drove the improvement. He was only there to guide her in safe, minimal movements to reintroduce a semblance of dance. As this fragile equilibrium persisted, members of the household surmised that the ultimate test of whether Harrington would truly validate Byron's role lay in a pending major social event. Harrington had scheduled a formal fundraiser at the estate, welcoming influential business associates, philanthropic partners, and a select circle of socialites. Preparations for the event dominated the staff's time, with caterers delivering supplies, decorators planning floral arrangements, and security teams coordinating guest entry. Some wondered if Charlotte would be relegated to a distant corner during the affair, as had been the case with past gatherings since her accident. Others speculated that this might be an opportunity for Harrington to showcase her improved disposition to the world, or even, in a more unlikely turn, to let her display a small taste of what she had regained through dance. A few days before the event, Byron found himself quietly approached by Harrington in one of the estate's side halls. According to an undermaid who passed them carrying linens, Harrington mentioned that a portion of the fundraiser would include a short musical performance, perhaps a piano recital or a string quartet. He asked Byron whether Charlotte might enjoy accompanying that moment in some graceful way from her wheelchair, if it was medically safe. The undermaid firmly believed that Harrington framed it as an inquiry rather than an order. She reported that Byron answered diplomatically, explaining this idea to Charlotte would require tact. But if Charlotte felt ready, it could be a significant display of her emotional progress. That conversation set in motion a series of discreet discussions among Byron, the nurse, and Charlotte herself. The nurse described Charlotte's reaction as equally excited and anxious. She recognized the magnitude of dancing, however modestly, in the presence of a large gathering that had once only known her as the withdrawn heiress in a wheelchair. Staff later recounted that Charlotte cautiously agreed to consider it, provided she had the final say on which music was played and how public her participation would be. Word spread swiftly through the staff that if Charlotte did decide to perform, it would represent not just an advancement in her personal journey, but also a tacit acceptance from Harrington of Byron's unconventional guidance. Eager eyes waited for the night of the fundraiser, expecting it to serve as the culminating test of whether father, daughter, and driver could unify around this shared endeavor. In hallways and staff quarters, speculation excitedly ran through questions about how the guests would respond, and whether Harrington himself, famed for his guarded manner, would allow this unplanned demonstration of open vulnerability to unfold in his carefully curated world. When the evening of the event finally arrived, tension filled the estate's every corner. Guests in elegant attire drifted among lavish floral displays and softly lit corridors. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the staff and Byron helped Charlotte prepare. They rolled her wheelchair into a small antechamber just off the main hall, giving her a chance to rehearse gentle arm motions in secrecy. Byron repeated a few reassurance strategies: slow breaths, measured movements, and the knowledge that she could stop any time. The nurse adjusted Charlotte's posture, ensuring no painful strain occurred. Amid that hush of final preparations, Harrington briefly entered to ask if Charlotte needed anything else. Observers claimed that the look they exchanged contained something beyond their usual reserve, perhaps a fusion of cautious pride and delicate hope. Then Harrington departed to greet the assembled benefactors, leaving Charlotte and Byron alone to take their first step soar. More accurately, their first dance-like gestures into what might become a defining moment of her newfound self-confidence.